Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we have the grand final of the Chess Champions Tour, which is being held in Toronto, Canada. Now, to refresh everybody, yesterday in the first set of best-of-4 games, Magnus Carlsen defeated Wesley So by a score of 2.5 to 1.5. That means that today we have set number 2 of a best-of-4 match between Magnus and Wesley, the rematch. If Wesley does not win this best-of-4 match, the tournament is over and Magnus Carlsen will be crowned the grand champion, winning a very cool $200,000. So let's jump right into the action. So Wesley has white in the first game on day 2, just like yesterday, and he starts out with the move b3. We get the move g6, bishop b2, knight to f6, and now g3. Now this opening is definitely a little bit of surprise because Wesley is a player who generally plays moves like e4, d4 on move number 1. But my general theory is that Wesley's a little bit tired. He's played a lot of chess here in Toronto, and he wants to play simple chess where he can blitz out a lot of quick moves and simply get a position rather than ending up in a very serious theoretical duel. So after g3, we get bishop to g7, c4 played here. Now Wesley could have played bishop g2 as well, but he tries to stop black from playing d5 in one go. We get castles, bishop g2. Now Magnus plays d6, and we get this move e3. Now this is the first sign to me that Wesley was really unsure of what to do, because this move d4 is a standard move to try and stop black from playing either c5 or e5. But when Wesley goes e3, allowing e5, now he has some tough decisions in terms of whether to push d4, whether to push e4, maybe f4, and you don't really know what to do. So Wesley goes knight e2, we get rook e8, and now knight b3, c6 played by Magnus, trying to build a big black center with the pawns on e5 and d5. And now we have this move e4 from Wesley. Now e4 is not a move that I expected to see from Wesley. It's very clear that he was unsure of what to do, and this move simply doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, white played e3 earlier in the game. If we go back to move number 6, if white wanted this setup, white could have played e4 followed by knight e2 and knight c3 in one go. But when you play this move e3, you went e3, and then to play e3 e4 in 2 turns rather than playing e4 in 1 turn is simply a fundamental mistake. Additionally, after e4, white now is going to struggle to play d4 because with the knight on f6 and the rook on e8, there's always a lot of pressure towards the central pawn. And what that means is that if white can't go d4, let's say you get some position with like d3, for example, here, the bishop on b2 is very passive. The knight's in the way. You don't really get any scope here, and black should be a little bit better. So Wesley's bishop on b2 not great. He's wasted a tempo by going e3 e4, and let's see how the game proceeds. So we get the move a6 from Magnus, we get castles, b5, a3 played here, knight bd7, and now the move d3 from Wesley, and now rook b8 played by Magnus. Now Magnus has a couple of ideas here. First of all, he might want to open up the b file here for the rook on b8. Additionally, if it's possible, let's say white were to play a4, for example, after b4, knight b1, let's just say bishop b7, knight d2, black can get d5, and he has this big black center. So black structure is very, very flexible here. You might want to open with b file, maybe you want to go b4, maybe d5 as well. With all these ideas, black is already completely fine out of the opening. In fact, the computer thinks black is already a little bit better. So we get rook to b1 being played by Wesley here. Magnus plays knight c5. Great move here, putting pressure on the pawns on b3 and d3. We have the move bishop to a1 played by Wesley. Magnus trades on c4. We get b takes c4 played here. Now this is a move that I didn't like. Computer doesn't like it either. It prefers d takes c4, but again, I understand why Wesley did not play this move, because after a5 here, you have this weakness on b3. Black can play like bishop a6 or bishop to e6 to target the pawn. And additionally, down the road, if black can say get this knight to e6 followed by something like knight d4, suddenly black has the classic diamond hands formation in addition to a bastion with the knight on d4, and black is just much better. So Wesley decides to take with the b pawn. We get rook takes rook, queen takes rook. Now bishop e6 played here, putting pressure on the pawn on c4, so that white can never really play d4 because after takes, black is simply up a pawn. So we get bishop e6, rook to d1 is played, and now Magnus goes queen b8. Now at this point, it's very clear that black is better, and Magnus has achieved the dream. He's reached an endgame here. There's only one open file which he can use, and white has these weak pawns and a bad bishop in the corner on a1, which is simply not doing anything. So with all these advantages, Magnus has to be feeling really good about himself. So we get queen c2, queen b3 is played, we get queen c1, Now Magnus plays knight fd7, rerouting the knight, also trying to prevent this d4 pawn push potentially down the road. Now here Wesley decides to go all in with d4, and when I was doing my live coverage of this on my stream on Twitch, I thought this was a great practical decision, because if white doesn't do anything quickly here, black has these great knights that are set up perfectly. You've got these weaknesses. Black can go rook b8, claim the file, bad bishop on a1. With all these issues here, it makes sense to try and muddy the waters and complicate the situation, especially because both players are slowly but surely getting low on time. So we get d4. Takes, bishop takes d4, played by Magnus. Rook takes d4, and now the move knight to e5 is played here, putting maximum pressure on the pawn on c4. Also, the pawn on e4 is weak. You can jump with the knight to d3, and these knights give black a decisive advantage. So we get rook takes d6. Knight d3 is played. Wesley plays queen to d1 here. Magnus takes the juicer on a3, putting pressure on the bishop, the knight, and the rook all at the same time. Wesley plays c5 here, which is a bit of a desperation move, trying to hope for some counterplay with queen c5. You could sack the rook, and now white actually is much better here because he has a bishop and a knight for the rook. But in addition, you've got this great scope long square bishop on a1, aiming towards the black king on g8. Here, Magnus decides to play this move bishop b3. Now, bishop b3 is not a bad move per se. Black is still much better here, but the computer thought that after bishop g4 hitting the queen, if white moves the queen to b1, after knight takes f2 here, black is simply winning. If you take the knight, there's queen takes pawn, checking the king, winning the rook on d6 here. And if you don't take the knight, what else can you really do? Maybe you can go rook f6, but after knight back to d3, now the pawn on c5 is going to fall with check, and white's position is completely hopeless. So we get the move bishop to b3, which is played by Magnus instead. Queen to f1, bishop to c4, guarding this knight on d3 so that white can't recapture it. We have the move knight to e2, queen takes c5, rook to d4, and now Magnus goes back to a3 with the queen. At this point in the game, you can probably tell that Magnus is quite low on time. He only has 20 seconds here, whereas Wesley is 1:10. So if Wesley can just find a little bit of an imbalance and maybe create some complications, there are chances for him to survive and or maybe even win if he can activate this dark square bishop on the long diagonal. We get h3 from Wesley here. Magnus goes knight c5, queen to c1, trade. Now bishop to b5 is played. If black were to not move the bishop, say you go a5, after f4, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time. Your knight is under attack, your bishop is under attack, and black will lose material. So we have bishop b5, f4 played anyway, knight to c4. Wesley goes e5, trying to open up the scope for this light square bishop as well. Magnus plays knight e6, we get rook to d7, and now this move c5 is played. We get rook to d3, a5 here, and now rook b3 is played. And this is a very serious, or actually sorry, this is not the serious mistake. The next move is we get rook to d8, and now Wesley makes a huge mistake, or a serious mistake as I should say, with this move knight d3. Now, to be fair to both players, are very low on time, can't be critical, but if Wesley had played rook takes b5 here, after rook to d1, king f2, rook takes c1, and bishop d5, white has the two b's here. The knights are actually kind of weak on c4 and e6, and computer here does not give black a big advantage at all, and I think Wesley would have saved this game and drawn if he had found this resource. But with both players low on time, Wesley instead plays knight d3. We get a4, rook takes b5, rook d3, and now the problem is there's no bishop d5. Rook d1 is incoming, the pawn on g3 is hanging as well, and it's just totally hopeless. Wesley plays rook b8, king g7, now he goes rook b1, and after rook takes g3, the position is effectively lost. You're going to lose the pawn on f4, you're down 2 pawns. Bishop on a1 is on a completely closed diagonal here, and the rest is hopeless. The game concludes shortly after king h2. We get rook a3, f5 takes, we get rook to g1, king to f8, rook c1, knight e3, bishop c6, knight d4 played by Magnus, trying to get rid of one of the bishops. And sure, you can say, well, why trade the bishop for the knight? Why trade the knight for the bishop here? Because the bishop is so passive. But with black having so many extra pawns on the board, now it's a matter of liquidating the position, trading off the material, and getting to a clear-cut winning endgame. So we get bishop takes d4, takes, bishop b5, f4 played here by Magnus to reinforce this bastion on e3, rook c8, king g7, we get rook c7, rook a2, king h1, king to g6 played here by Magnus, understanding that even after white plays bishop d3, you can simply go king g5, ignoring this pawn on f7, because you have 1, 2, 3 wide peepos pushing up the board here. Combined with white's passive king and only one e-pawn, it's just not enough. We get rook takes f7, rook d2, E6 played here. Rook takes bishop. E7. For a split second, you might think, wait, Wesley's pushed the pawn through. He's pushing P. He's going to get a queen and win the game. But alas, after rook d1, king h2, knight f1 check, king g2, and rook to e1 here, the rook stops the pawn from queening, or I guess you can still queen the pawn, but it will be captured and black will win the game. King f2 is played. Rook to e3, king takes f1, a3, and after a3, h4, king g4 is played. And here Wesley So resigns the first game because the rook is tied down to the pawn. Black meanwhile has two wide peepos that he can push down the board in the a and the d pawn, and white just doesn't have any resources. So Magnus wins game number 1. He takes a 1-0 lead in the match, winning with the black pieces, and it's looking all but hopeless for Wesley. That being said, Wesley is a very strong player. He's the total fighter. Let's see if he can come back. In game number 2, Magnus with the white pieces opens with e4. Wesley plays c5, essaying the Sicilian defense, mainly because he must try and do something here. With only 3 games left, needing to get at least 1 victory to prolong the match, he's got to try. So we have knight f3. d6 is played, bishop c4 from Magnus, knight f6, and now we get this move d3. After e6, we get castles and bishop e7. Now, fun fact, but when I was much younger, about 20-ish years ago, I used to play at the Marshall Chess Club all the time, and I was actually somebody who loved playing the Najdorf systems with d6 and a6. And there was this famous Israeli grandmaster by the name of Leonid Yudasin, and whenever I would play him, he would always play these systems with like bishop b3 and bishop c4, d3, followed by bishop b3 and c3, and I struggled mightily against him when he played this setup. So it's kind of amusing to see Magnus now playing the same setup here with bishop c4 and d3. It's one of the ways that white can try to avoid theoretical discussions. So here we have a4, d5 played by Wesley. We got bishop b5 check, king f8 here. Now this is already trying to make the game become very messy. Black could have blockaded with, say, bishop d7 here, but after e5, now the knight on f6 doesn't really have any good squares, and after knight g8, c4, followed by knight c3, white is much better because of this bad knight on g8, bad rook on h8, can't really castle the king, and it's really difficult to play. On top of that, after king to f8, Wesley knows he needs to try to create complications, so even if objectively he doesn't like his position, he doesn't matter whether it's bad or not, because you have to do all you can to win the game. So after king f8, we get e5, knight g8, Magnus goes a5 here. Important move, because now if you play a move like c4 after a6, the bishop is stuck. There are no squares available. And if you play d4, now after c4 here, again, this a6 move will trap the bishop on b5. So a5, we get a6, bishop a4. Wesley gobbles the pawn on a5, and Magnus goes c4 here, trying to go for quick development. Black here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces on the back rank, which are not developed. d4 played by Wesley, knight d2, and now queen c7. For Wesley here, the one plus side on top of being up a pawn is that the position is very closed here. There are no open files, so even though he's lacking in development, if he can keep the position closed for long enough, he has chances to win the game. Knight e4, bishop to d7 is played. Magnus trades the bishops, and now he goes bishop f4, over protecting the pawn on e5. Wesley plays h6. We get h4 here, trying to stop black from playing g5 here, which would take some space. We get g6, b4 played here by Magnus, and this is a great move because Magnus understands here that black is still lacking heavily in development here. So even though white's trying to open up a position on the opposite side of the board, if black can't get these 3 pieces developed, white will have enough firepower on the queen side to try and attack. C takes b4 is played, knight takes d4, and now Wesley plays rook to d8. We have queen to f3 here, king g7, trying to sidestep any tricks. If you play a move like knight b8, for example, after knight d6, there are all kinds of threats. Bishop h6, knight e6, black king on f8 is completely toasted. So after queen to f3, king g7 played by Wesley, we get knight to d6, takes, queen c8, and now Magnus goes rook f e1, trying to stop black from pushing e5. Computer here says that after h5, g5, and bishop c1, white is probably much better here because you can go bishop b2, lining up huge threats on the diagonal. Black can't ever really go e5 because then you get this bastion for the knight on f5, and after knight f6, bishop b2, I think from a human perspective here, even if the computer says that black is okay, it's almost impossible to play this position. Nonetheless, we have rook fe1 being played, knight f6 played here by Wesley. We get knight back to b3, we get rook he8, and now the move bishop c1 is played here. Now bishop c1 is not the right idea, but here Magnus starts to lose the threat. What Magnus needed to play was this move c5 to overprotect his pawn on d6 here. If black were to take the pawn on c5 after takes and bishop e5, rook guards the bishop, knight's under pressure on f6, and black will have to resign the game. Additionally, if black plays a move like knight d5, now you can even play a move like d4, and these three pawns are so well protected here in the center that if anybody is better, it is white. At any rate, we have bishop c1 from Magnus with the idea of going bishop b2. Wesley plays e5, we get bishop b2. Now we have b6 trying to stop white from playing c5. g4 here from Magnus, and this is a move that I really don't like. In this position here, I think that what Magnus should have gone for was something like h5 g5 and rook to e3, followed by rook to e1, lining up the double stack, trying to play for more play in the center of the board rather than going g4. But g4 still has some merit. White wants to go g5, maybe d4 here, but the biggest issue is that now after king g8 is played, where is the attack on the diagonal? It doesn't really exist. Black can go a5 here and have two connected pass pawns on the queen side. You've now pushed pawns in front of your king, and Magnus is really starting to lose the thread in this position. So we have knight d2 being played, rook e6 from Wesley. We get g5, takes, knight h7, and now queen g3 is played. After queen g3, we get rook takes d6, and now the move d4 played here from Magnus. Now, at this point, of course, the players are again getting low on time. It's getting very chaotic here, and we're going to see who has the better nerves. Wesley plays rook takes d4, sacking the rook, which is the correct move here, because after takes, you'll notice that black has a knight and 1, 2, 3 pawns in return for the rook, and his king is also very safe on g8 without a dark square bishop or a knight near this king. So for that reason, black should be close to winning. We get rook to e7 played, knight c5 from Wesley, rook ae1, and now the move rook f8 is played here to guard the pawn on f7. Not the best move here, but completely understandable. We have queen h4, Wesley goes b3, and now we get this move king g2. Now I'm not going to be super critical of the moves here because of course players are low on time, you can't expect perfect play, but what Wesley needed to do here was play this move knight to d3, or even earlier back here play queen to f5. So on rook to e5 there's simply queen d3 or queen c2. Both moves here work, and black is close to winning. So back to the game, we get b3, king g2, queen f5 played, rook e5 played here from Magnus, and now we have queen d7 and this move rook d5, queen c7 played, and now we get the move rook h1. Now this is completely turned around again, much like the previous game. Wesley was ahead by over a minute on the clock. Unlike that game, however, he was much better in this one, but as the time gets really low, Magnus is simply starting to outplay Wesley. So we get f6, knight to e4 played by Magnus. We get f takes g5, knight takes g5 played. This is a mistake. Computer says after queen to h6, white is apparently winning, and it's very hard to play this move because you see, well, free knight on e4, what to do. But after queen g6, queen g7, queen e4, black's pawns here are very, very weak, and the rooks are very, very active here in the center of the board, and for that reason, white will win. Knight takes g5 is played instead. We get knight to d3 here, knight to e6 from Magnus, queen to f7, and now we have this horrible move, queen takes h7, throwing away the game completely from Magnus. At this point, knight takes f8 would have been completely winning, because in this position the queen guards the pawn on f2, you can't take it. After knight f4, king to h2 here, Magnus probably thought, well, black takes, rook d4, knight e6, and the knights hold each other. But after king g1 threatening to checkmate with a double stack on the h file, it's all but hopeless. And if black were to play knight takes d5, another option, what Magnus, I assume, saw was he probably thought that after takes, there's a5 and a4, a3, and black is winning. But here white wins because you can push p with d6, d7 and win the game. And if black were to go king g7, trying to stop the d pawn from queening here, for example, white is simply winning here with the move rook to e1, followed by d7 and d8. Instead, we get queen takes h7, and the order is inverted, and now white is losing because after takes, we get king takes h7, knight takes f8, king to g8, and suddenly with this knight on d3, black is pushing p, pawn on a6 covers the b5 square, you've got knight f4, and there's nothing Magnus can actually do here. So Magnus plays rook d6, we get b2, rook takes b6, a5 played here. Now king takes f8, it also works, but again, with limited time, you're worried that the white king will simply get close to the center and harass knight on d3. So we get a5, which also supports this knight before hook. So if white plays a move like knight to d7, after knight b4, pawn holds the knight, and now it's a little bit of a shield, and black will get a queen with b1 on the next turn. So we get rook b3, a4 played by Wesley, rook b8, a3 pushing p up the board, knight to e6, king f7, knight g5, king g7, rook b7, king g8. We got a little bit of a dance here with knight e4. Now a2 is played and Magnus goes knight f6, king f8, not king h8 of course, because rook to h7 would be the classic dovetail checkmate, or I think Arabian checkmate if I'm not mistaken. And so we get king f8. Rook d7 played here by Magnus. Desperation, hoping that black will queen, because after check, 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 there's no way for black to avoid the repetition here. Of course, if you go to h8 again, you walk into checkmate in one, and so for that reason the game is a draw. Wesley, however, here after rook d7 plays the move knight to f4, king to f3, and now knight to h5. And here Magnus Carlsen resigns in game number 2, because after knight h7, king e8, now there's no repetition. If you trade the knights, one of these pawns gets through, if not both, and black just will have way too much material. Magnus resigns the second game, and that means that now the match is all square 1-1 after a very shocking turn of events. Game number 3, Wesley would have the white pieces. It would end in a relatively peaceful draw, which means we go to game number 4, where Magnus Carlsen has the white pieces. We're tied 1.5, 1.5. Magnus wins this game, he wins the whole tournament. If it's a draw, we go to Armageddon. If Wesley wins, we have the reset to the third match. Magnus plays d4. We get knight to f6, c4 this time. Magnus choosing to play something a little bit quieter rather than playing e4 on move 1. We get e6, knight f3, d5. Now we get knight to c3. And after c5, we have arrived once again in the classic semi-trash variation. We get c takes d5, takes, e4, takes, and now Magnus plays knight g5. Against Fabiano Caruana in the semifinal match, Magnus actually played this move knight to e5, but for this game, he reverts back to the standard main line with knight g5, hitting both the pawns on f7 and e4. Wesley plays bishop e6. We get this move bishop to d2 being played, knight bd7. Magnus takes on e4. Material is evened out, and in general this position is considered to be relatively dry, but black has the issue with the king on d8, which is underdeveloped. So we have h6 being played here, bishop c3 from Magnus, trying to take advantage of this long diagonal. Rook c8, we get the move bishop d3, and now Wesley plays f6, trying to blunt the force of the star square bishop. Castles is played, and now we get the move king to e8, bishop to e2, king to f7, and f4 is played here by Magnus. Now again, all pretty standard here. White has a small advantage here perhaps because black's had to waste time moving the king, but if black could say get 2 more moves, say bishop e7 and rook d8 for example, black is completely fine. So what Magnus is hoping for here is that Wesley has wasted too much time putting the king on f7 and black will be unable to complete his development. Here Wesley plays the move bishop c5 instead, and this is a big mistake. Computer says after h5 stopping white from playing bishop h5, black is fine, but in a practical situation, especially rapid and blitz, when you don't have all day to think, it's a very hard move to play, and it's very easy to see the boogeyman, because what Wesley no doubt saw was f5, bishop d5, rook a d1, and he thought, uh-oh, the pieces are under attack, h5 is very loose here, there are all these issues, all these weaknesses, what to do? But after bishop e4 and rook takes d7, black can very coolly play king to e8 here. If white plays rook fd1, you have bishop c6 kicking the rook back, and even though white is still a little bit better here in this position, black probably can save the game. Additionally, there's this very nasty move bishop b5 as well, and it just looks like white is completely winning here. You've got these all kinds of fossils here. You have rook e1, white's got to be winning, but of course the 3500 plus computer says no, just play the very quiet and calm move a6, ignoring everything in the position, and you're fine. And it's because after rook c7 check, takes, and king d7, now white's rook is under attack. If you go to a8, there's a fossil with bishop c5 check, black wins the rook and the game. Again, is this realistic? For any human, this would never be possible in a blitz game or a rapid game. In a classical game, maybe it's possible to find this, but in a blitz or a rapid game with so little time where you can make critical decisions mostly on the fly, this is not practical. So Wesley instead plays bishop to c5 here, which is a mistake, because now after knight c5 and rook c5, white has the 2 Bs, or the bishop pair versus a bishop and a knight, and against the greatest endgame player of all time, Magnus Carlsen, good luck surviving. Magnus goes rook to d1 here, trying to put pressure on the knight on d7. We get the move knight b6, and now bishop d4 is played, rook to a5 and b4. Great move from Magnus here, attacking the rook on a5. If black plays rook takes a2, after bishop h5, white is winning here due to the power of the Bs. If you go g6, there's f5 crashing through here. One sample line is just takes, And after rook f6, king e7, white sacks the rook with rook takes b6. But after takes, you'll notice that black has very sad pawns, and white simply has one extra bishop on the board. Which means that after b4, you have to go rook to d5, stopping this whole idea with bishop h5 and f5. Bishop to f3 is played here by Magnus, putting pressure on the rook and the pawn on this diagonal. And now Wesley so blunders with this move, rook b5. Computer says that after rook d8, white is much better here after bishop h5, g6, and f5. But maybe there's still some chance to survive in this position after sorry, wrong order. Sorry, how does it go? After takes, and here there's a very quiet move, rook d6, guarding the pawn on d6, and now black is still kind of in the game. Again, for a 3,500 plus computer, very easy to see. Is for any human, not realistic. Wesley plays rook b5 here, and now Magnus plays bishop c5, putting this rook in jail here. You'll notice that if white has time to move, let's just say you go rook g8 after bishop to e2 here, this rook is stuck. You simply have nowhere to go with the rook. And after knight c4, there's a move like a4 even, and this rook will have to sacrifice itself in order to prolong the game. Wesley goes knight to a4 here, and now Magnus plays bishop e2. We get rook takes c5, takes, and now the move knight c3 is played. This is all desperation from Wesley. What he's hoping for is that by forking this rook and the bishop at the same time, if white moves the rook, there's takes, and bishop c4. And now white's still a little bit better here after rook b2, but in a rook and pawn endgame, you never know what's going to happen, and maybe you can still draw. Unfortunately for Wesley, Magnus has bishop to h5, checking the king on f7 here. We have g6 being played, and now the move rook d3, attacking the knight while your bishop is also under attack. Wesley plays bishop c4 here, which it doesn't really matter what you play because all roads lead to a loss. But g takes h5, rook takes c3, and maybe bishop d5 with bishop c6 would have given Wesley a chance to draw the game. Do I think he would have drawn the game? No. I think practically speaking, this is almost certainly winning for white anyway, but at least the game would have gone on. Whereas after bishop to c4 is played, we get rook to d7 here, and after rook to d7, now Wesley plays the move king to e6. We get rook to d6 check, king to f7, and now rook c1. The dust has settled, and black will not be able to keep all these pieces on the board. The bishop covers the all-critical e2 square, and black has nothing to do. Knight e4 played by Wesley. We got rook to d4 from Magnus, and now Wesley so resigns the game because all these endgames are totally hopeless. Probably best is to take on h5, but after rook c4, f5, c6, takes. The rooks are stacked on an open file. You've got these double pawns. The knight looks good on e4, but it's not doing a whole lot, and white will win the game. So after rook to d4, Wesley so resigns the game. That means for a second day in a row, Magnus Carlsen wins the set by a score of 2.5 to 1.5. A little bit different than yesterday with 3 decisive games versus 1 decisive game, but nonetheless, Magnus Carlsen emerges victorious. He wins the Champions Chess Tour. He wins $200,000, and he proves once again why he is the best player in the world. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the grand finals of Champions Chess Tour held in Toronto, Canada, and being sponsored by chess.com. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button below, and I will be back soon with some more great recaps here on YouTube. See you guys. Bye.